Metric modulation can be really tricky and hard to understand, so let's take a look at what is probably the simplest metric modulation. I did a lesson on a more complex metric modulation a few months ago, and I got a few questions about how to start using and understanding metric modulations, so hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. A metric modulation is when a tempo change happens and it's based on a note value in the original tempo. There are of course other ways to change tempos, but metric modulations create really natural tempo changes. The simple metric modulation I'm going to cover in this lesson goes between two of the most common time signatures, 4/4 and 12/8. 4/4 is a simple meter, meaning it has 2 notes per beat. And 12/8 is a compound meter, meaning it has 3 notes per beat. What makes this one so easy to understand and feel is that the eighth note speed is going to remain consistent between these two time signatures. The first example here goes from 4/4 to 12/8, from 2 eighth notes per beat to 3 eighth notes per beat. Notice how the tempo decreases here from 120 to 80, but if I just play an eighth note click, you'll hear no difference. Now you can do this in a DAW and not even have to change the tempo because that eighth note stays the same. But if we're talking about the actual beat that we're feeling here, that slows down from a quarter note to a dotted quarter note, or 2/3 the original speed. This can be done in reverse as well, from 12/8 to 4/4. In this case, the tempo gets faster, so depending on the effect you want in the music, you can choose to go either direction. A big part of making metric modulations work is the transition into them. It's pretty common to set up these changes with drums maybe hinting at the new tempo, or even having the entire band hint at the new tempo right before the actual modulation. Now you might be asking, why would you want to do a metric modulation? And for me, it's really the same as any other big musical change. You would do it for the contrast. I might want to take a verse or a bridge to a slower tempo, and therefore I could use this modulation to move to 12/8, and then because that eighth note is remaining consistent, it's really easy to move back to 4/4 if I was moving to a chorus or a different section. In prog specifically, where songs are often longer, this can be a great way to contrast sections of music, or in a concept album, a modulation can help move from song to song more naturally. One thing I did want to mention is that in this lesson, I'm talking about metric modulations where the entire band or ensemble is moving to a new tempo and staying there. There is a technique called implied metric modulation that drummers use all the time. In this case, a drummer will imply a new tempo for a measure or two, or even just a couple of beats, and then go back to the original tempo. It's a very cool idea and very useful, but not really a full metric modulation like what I'm covering here. There's another really common way to do this 4/4 to 12/8 metric modulation, and that's by using 16th notes instead of 8th notes. Same concept, but in this case, the 16th note pulse remains consistent. The The difference here is that when it moves to 12/8, or we could call it 12/16 in this case, the tempo increases where it decreased in the eighth note version of this. Now we have two ways of moving from 4/4 to 12/8, one that will result in a slower tempo and one that will result in a faster tempo, and it's really nice to have the option to go faster or slower. The 16th note approach can of course be reversed as well, 12/8 or 12/16 moving to 4/4. And this moves it back to a slower tempo. So between the 8th note and 16th note modulations here, you can move between 4/4 and 12/8 in either direction and have the tempo slow down or speed up, which gives you a lot of options as a composer. This metric modulation can also be used for more of a straight-up tempo change. If I treat the dotted quarter like a quarter note and put two notes inside of it, I could instantly have the same riff move to a slower tempo. This is still based on that original 8th note idea, but here it's used to move to a slower 4/4. This is more complex and harder to feel at first, but it gives you an idea of how far you can take metric modulations if you want to. I'm going to leave this lesson here for now. If you'd like me to cover some more complex metric modulations as a follow-up to this video, let me know. In the meantime, I have covered some more complex metric modulations in a few of my analysis videos, specifically my lesson on the rhythms from the Animals as Leaders tune Monomyth. But if you enjoyed this lesson, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share, and I'll see you all in the next video. Till then, stay proggy.